do have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to use the chat function or raise your virtual hand. As you might have seen on the agenda, we will have some breakout sessions, and we really hope to have engaging discussions. You are currently all muted, but you can unmute yourself during the breakout sessions. The breakout sessions themselves will last around 10 minutes, and my colleagues who are also giving the presentations, Eduardo Noboa, Joachim Fünfgeld, and Fentje Jacobsen, will then report back. And we really hope to get this a bit more going and to really have an interactive discussion. So please feel free to jump in to find common solutions to the problem we probably all face currently, which is talking only virtually. I will start and share my screen now. So, welcome everybody to the webinar Stronger Together, Multi-Actor Partnerships for 100% Renewable Energy in the Global South. The webinar today is part of a webinar series on paving the way towards resilient, inclusive growth in the Global South, 100% renewable, 100% accessible. We already had a first webinar on the 4th of November on energy modeling, which is available on the World Future Council website. And we will have one more webinar next week on political success, ensuring relevance of 100% RE strategies in the Global South, where we are also welcoming colleagues from ICLE, agroecology food producer SECAM, and jurist on transportation. And you can also still register. So before I start with the actual agenda, just very quickly to set a bit the scene. So we are talking today about multi-actor partnerships, and maybe for some of you it's useful to just know what are MAPs or multi-actor partnerships. So MAPs are collaborative processes involving a wide range of actors from different sectors, geographies, and governance levels. And the aim of MAPs is to address complex issues together. As such, multi-actor partnerships have gained quite a lot of importance and also attention during the last years. And they are recognized because they recognize and address the complexity and interconnectedness of issues such as climate change, biodiversity, health, poverty, etc., and their respective nexuses. And I think we very well see currently that you can't keep one issue separate from the other. So we are currently in a global pandemic caused by zoonotic disease, which also has to do with biodiversity loss. And biodiversity loss is also linked to human activity, to climate change, etc. So it really, you can really feel that the interconnectedness is really all surrounding us. And yeah, and to limit climate change to 1.5 degrees, we need to really urgently decarbonize our energy sector as well. But doing so and shifting to a fully 100% renewable energy powered system cannot be tackled by a single stakeholder or particular sector alone. Rather, we need a range of stakeholders across all sectors and governance levels to sit together, to collaborate, to make a 100% renewable energy vision a reality. And as such, multi-actor partnerships can facilitate new alliances, cooperations, and synergies across parties and governance level by continuously engaging those. And we really need to think outside the box, as the future cannot be shaped by ideas from the past, and everybody will really need to become part of the transformation process to test new approaches, facilitate innovative ideas and business models. And for this, strengthening change makers and building capacities across all sectors is crucial. And this is why we have a session on multi-actor partnerships today. Welcome again. And for those who joined a bit later, we are recording the session. And if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat. And you are currently unmuted, but you have the opportunity to unmute yourself. Particular welcome is this obviously during the breakout sessions, where I would really like to have an interactive dialogue with you. We are going to start with my colleague, Eduardo Noboa, on improving the policy science interface, then go over to my colleague Joachim Fünfgeld from Brot for the Welt on opportunities and challenges of multi-actor engagement. We will have an intervention from Costa Rica by Adrian Martinez Blanco from La Ruta del Clima on the benefits of multi-actor partnerships for inclusive decision-making in the country. And afterwards, Fente Jacobsen from the WWF is talking about setting up multi-actor partnerships in times of COVID. What are the challenges and how can we deal with them? After that, we will have the 3 breakout sessions on policy science interface, opportunities and challenges, and maps in times of COVID. And my colleagues will report back afterwards, and we will also have some opportunity for questions and answers. And with that, I would like to give over to my colleague Eduardo. Oh no, actually, sorry about that. First, we are going to Slido, of course. You are probably all familiar with it. Either go to slido.com or use your mobile phone to use the QR code, type in the hashtag 87470, and we can then go to the first question. Have you ever set up multi-stakeholder platforms in your work? Yeah, so what is your experience? Have you already set up multi-actor partnerships? Yes or no? So only 2 people have answered right now. I guess a couple of more will come soon. So we'll give them just 1 more minute. And in the meantime, I can also try if my QR code is working. It is. So currently we do have 8 people who have replied. I encourage everybody to also join Slido because it's also very useful for us, obviously, because we see what kind of webinars or capacity building will be needed in the future. And currently we have an overwhelming majority actually saying, yes, they have experience in multi-stakeholder platforms with 98%, 80%, with roughly 20% saying no, they do not have any experience so far. So I guess for some of you, some of the materials today will be more of a repetition, but especially the breakout sessions will then be very useful, and we can see how we can tackle common challenges together. I would go back. You are obviously free to continue using Slido, but I would go back to the presentation. Here it is. It's working. Sorry about that. I guess we are all used to the technical issues already. With that, now I would like to hand over to my colleague Eduardo Noboa. Eduardo?
Yes, thank you very much, Anna. And thank you for this opportunity to have some reflections about science policy interface. And by saying that, I will start to explain from a more theoretical and practical perspective what are the different understandings of science policy interface. In this case, I would say that we are confronting the situation that scientific communities are pursuing to produce knowledge to solve problems or real problems. But the problem is that this language or this knowledge that is produced is not being understood by the public or the policy community. So we need to translate it somehow so that the policymakers and decision makers can use this knowledge in order to solve their problems. So we are confronting a phenomenon that is basically a mixture of a social phenomenon and also a communication phenomenon, where the perspectives are beyond the idea of translating the information from one community to another, but also they are related to the relationship and the networks that we can build between the scientists and the policymakers. Next, please.
Very sorry about that.
No.
Somehow it takes a while, sorry.
So I like this definition of science policy interface, which also talk about these relationships between scientists and decision makers, and is not only focused on the fact of translating the language from one community to another, but it says that it's encompass the relationships between scientists and other actors in the policy process, in which allow for exchanges, co-evolution, and joint construction of knowledge with the aim of enriching decision making. So the idea here is that this knowledge that is produced for decision making or for solving problems should be the result of a dynamic, of an interaction between scientific community and policymakers. And by saying that, we have to say that we have some assumptions, and basically our assumptions in order to choose these definitions are that scientific knowledge is an ingredient for policy making. So it is important to take into account this scientific knowledge, since this knowledge is most of the times evidence based and has a more technical and robust argumentation. Also, we can say that political decisions are also influencing science. So the political agendas also are influencing the way we are financing science, or the way we are prioritizing which topics to investigate. So the idea here is, from both ways, there's an interaction and interrelation between science and policy, where science is influencing policy processes and policy processes are influencing science. Next, please. So, from that perspective, I would say that science policy interface is a process of a stakeholder engagement, mainly, where we can choose the level of engagement of the different stakeholders. But first of all, we have to know that these stakeholders must be plural, must be uh, from different sectors, and also must be scientific actors, but also non-scientific actors. So the idea is to articulate those actors who are producing this technical knowledge about problems, about scenarios, about strategies, with the decision making and policy making community, which are also thinking about visions, futures, and values and policy solutions. So here the question is, what is the level of influence and interest that we would like to have in this engagement of stakeholders? And for me, the ideal will be to create a system of collaboration between these two communities. Now, but you can see here in this graph that there are different levels. You can start by informing, for example, when scientific community is producing knowledge and informing the policy cycle, or you can also involve the policymakers in the process of knowledge production. But also you can, as a scientific, to be consulted, or the other way around, a scientific researcher can consult to a policymaker about certain aspects or questions they have. But the ideal situation will be to collaborate. That means to build relationships, to build trust, to build networks of collaboration and social capital, where these communities can actually mobilize resources from one to another. When I say resources, I mean knowledge resources, technological resources, financial resources. Next, please. So these perspectives is very much drawing up on the idea of transdisciplinary research, which is a type of research where scientific and non-scientific are collaborating in order to produce collaboratively knowledge about problems, about scenarios, and about strategies for transformation. And the output of this knowledge co-production could be used for both, for the scientific practice when developing methodologies, theories, data for decision making, but data also for analyzing models, statistical models. But also this information could be used for the societal practice when this knowledge is applied in policy making, in decision making, and in solving problems from society. So the idea is to engage these stakeholders and to create these teams, these scientific research teams, but that are not traditionally built upon with scientific researchers, but also with other local actors and decision makers who are more closely to the problematic. Next, please. So in this sense, what we are trying to do when doing science policy interface is basically to integrate and assemble this analytic and abstract knowledge from the scientific community with this intuitive and experiential knowledge of practitioners. And the idea is to start to create mutual learning cycles where both of these communities are learning from each other. So science policy interface aims to create those spaces where they can interact, where they can have relationships, networks, and at the same time they can produce knowledge about solving real problems. Next, please. And scientific communities, mostly what they do is try to produce models which represent reality in a certain way. And for example, in the energy system modeling processes, what scientific community is doing is developing models about future scenarios, about problems, about the understanding of the energy system in this case. And this is the experience we have in the World Future Council also by applying these multi-actor partnerships where we have certain experts developing these econometric scenarios about the energy system of the future. But what we have to understand is those models and scenarios are not the reality because it is impossible to predict the future. But these models basically are the boundary objects. That means that these models are the input or are the object where all the different communities can engage or in negotiation, in reflection, in dialogues. So the idea is that the scenario is a tool that is useful for the negotiations, but is not the solution itself. Is only the way to engage stakeholders with certain hypotheses. The how can we develop in a certain way, and to catalyze negotiation dialogue among different communities. So this is one of the aspects of a science policy interface as a boundary object when models are boundary objects. Next, please. And in the same sense, the models are basically the output of the process of knowledge production where in most of cases in the energy sector, what we do is to create models about the system knowledge that is like the problem, the diagnostic of the energy system, about the visions, about the scenarios. This is the target knowledge or the normative knowledge about what are the preferable or the ideal scenarios of the future, and about also the strategies how to get to those visions, to those scenarios. So models basically inform these policy images and help us to create these policy discourses. But the other way around as well is this is a dialogue between policy and also the scientific community. From one side, the policies could also inform the technical developments or the scenario production, but the scenario production can also inform the policy making. In certain cases, the policies are already formulated and they need to be justified and technically argumented. And in some cases where I have been also experienced, models were used to justify certain policies. And the other way around as well, models and scenarios could be also useful to inform then the production or the formulation of policies. So there is a dialogue between policies and also between models. Next one, please. So in this sense, we are talking about a qualitative, quantitative nexus, what is so important to create this science policy interface. Because at the end, what we are doing is articulating a group of different actors from different sectors, from academia, from government, from civil society, from NGOs, and scientifics, of course, and non-scientifics, and in a process of knowledge production, which first of all is producing scenarios about ideas, about values, about interests and beliefs. So these participatory planning processes are trying to first create these qualitative scenarios where we are representing the interest of the actors, and then to connect these scenarios or try to translate those ideas or those beliefs of the different actors into quantitative scenarios, or to quantify those scenarios by saying how much does it cost, from an economical perspective, from the investment perspective, in order to have such an energy system in the case we are talking about energy systems transformation. Next, please. So finally, it is important to say that science policy interface is a societal process, is a social process of interaction, of knowledge production, of capacity building. And the idea is to create these social learning loops where these actors can engage not in one workshop and one time, but to create this transformation of the political culture. That means that we have to start to make decisions differently, to include more actors from different sectors with different perspectives. And this is the only way to also to achieve sustainability, when we are including other actors that have different values, such as the environmental values and social values, and start to deal with these undemocratic processes or monopolies of decision making that is facing the energy sector since decades. So energy sectors are highly autocratic and they have a monopoly of decision making. And one way in order to break those monopolies is to start to including or to having more participation, and academia can play a role in this by creating these science policy interfaces and attracting and including other actors in the decision making processes, and the outputs of these processes could be then communicated through different means in order to reinforce these communities, these epistemic communities, and create more critical mass in order to support energy transformation. I think this is the last one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. I think it is, I really liked your first slide, which is actually summing up, I think, what many of us are facing, that one group of people are talking about apples when the other ones is talking about oranges, and another group is then talking about limes. So I think it really makes it quite clear that these multi-actor partnerships can really be a backbone to facilitating this kind of policy science interface, to get to know what does the community need, what does civil society need, what do policymakers need, and what can, in our case, energy modelers actually deliver, and to really get them on the same page. And I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I think your presentation was a very good introduction to the conceptual framework of how multi-actor partnerships can influence and actually facilitate the policy science interface. So thank you very much. Just in case we have any questions, I will come back to them later on. So please keep posting them in the chat box, and as I said, we'll get back later on. Now I would like to invite my colleague Joachim Pünfgeld from Bread for the World. No. Now it's not working again. Why not? No. No. Who will be talking about the lessons learned of multi-actor engagement, its opportunities and challenges. Joachim?
Yep, thank you very much, Anna. I hope you can hear me well, and yeah, welcome to all the participants. Also, I saw already that there's a lot of expertise, people with a lot of expertise listening today. So I really also look forward to the discussions with you and keep the input, I think, a little shorter than planned so that we have more time to discuss, since you bring so much experience that it will be interesting to share. I will share some lessons learned now on projects we have been working on with the World Future Council and national partner organizations on multi-actor engagement, on especially 100% renewables. Next slide, please. Especially with lessons learned on the work in 3 countries, in Tanzania, in Bangladesh, and in Costa Rica. And I'm specifically happy also that Adrian from Costa Rica, who worked with World Future Council on a 100% RE scenario, will share some more specific insights on the work in Costa Rica. And I will just give you some general lessons learned that we distilled from the work there, and you can see them all also in a recent publication that we developed with World Future Council that you saw on the slide before. I'm sure you'll get the link after the webinar. And in that publication, we summarized the lessons learned on multi-actor partnerships, but also on the scenarios, what we learned there technically, and also on the policy roadmaps that we developed for those countries. Next slide, please. So just here a general overview on how we worked, or on what kind of model our work in those countries followed. In the center was really something we called a multi-actor partnership, sort of a platform for different stakeholders to discuss and engage, which we created. And we tried in those platforms really to bring together like a core group of people sharing a same vision of 100% RE, so a progressive group of people as influential as possible from all kinds of sectors, driven by civil society, but also with people from, be it international cooperation or government or parliament, even civil society groups also that are not directly linked with energy, be it women's groups or other development groups. Academia, media, so a core group of progressive, influential people to work through the whole process. And the process usually started with developing a joint vision, which of course entailed then 100% RE, but also other development objectives and other visions in them. In Tanzania, for example, it was clear that the government was working towards becoming a middle income country by 2025. So that needed to be included in the vision of the partnership as well. But then also, of course, SDG 7 played a crucial role about energy access, job creation, local value creation, independence from energy imports. Those could all be ingredients of a shared vision to think about a future energy system and sort of to move and to motivate this partnership. A second step then is gathering of data and information, of course, a crucial point, because when you use this scientific process that Eduardo also described, of course, you need to feed in a lot of information and data, and then it's of course the question of which data, which information, and you should use those that are relevant but also accepted by a majority in those countries. Next step was really to develop energy scenarios, 100% RE scenarios, basically to see which energy pathway was best suited to achieve the vision defined before. And in all cases, an ambitious 100% RE pathway was best suited to achieve the visions. We continued with capacity building and narrative building based on the scenario so that different stakeholders really could understand what the scenario means and what's in them. And that was especially important also with government agencies, since for them, it could, different aspects were interesting, be it like the best sites for wind energy. On the case of Bangladesh, all that information about offshore wind, which was new for many government officials, the potential of offshore that the country has. So that part was really crucial. Next step is then use all that information to develop a policy roadmap. So sort of recommendations, which policy changes are needed. And then a last phase of creating, of having real impact on advocacy, and last step would be policy reform. So that's sort of the cycle that we try to follow in those projects, and also in follow-up projects that Fentio will talk about in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So some lessons learned. As I mentioned, we kind of worked with CSOs as facilitators of change in the sort of driving that process. And it's, I think, important that we as civil society organizations accept that role as also convening and driving these kind of processes. Of course, we still have that role of being watchdogs and activists fighting for the good cause, organizing demonstrations and all that. But we also should use that role of convening, of bringing people together, of being inventive, of bridging the gap also between people on the ground and people in governments and even academia, media. So this convening role of setting such engagement platforms up is one that we should really embrace, because I think CSOs are really well suited to do so. Next, please. Then the mapping of stakeholders was really a key exercise, and it's really important to put a lot of focus on that, to see which group is really at the core of such a partnership, which groups should be a little less involved and a little less committed. So really to map among all groups of stakeholders possible, and look who are the most influential on one hand, but on the other hand also the most progressive, with which you can build really a shared vision. So that's really an important task, and really think outside the box of the CSO bubble, but also go broader. Next. And then when you have that, really defining a shared vision. I show you here the vision of the Marrakesh Declaration from 2016 of 48 Global South countries agreeing to go 100% renewable. And even if not too much has happened into that direction, even in those countries, it's important to have such a vision, that such a platform and such a multi-actor engagement platform can follow. It motivates, and it really can become sort of a unique selling point of this platform to build, and is thus really an important task. Next. Then, of course, build a platform, which means sort of have regular meetings with the core group, sort of institutionalize the meetings, and yeah, build sort of, it doesn't need to be like an organizational structure as becoming like a new NGO or something, but rather having regular meetings and have some sort of structure as of how to meet and how often to meet. Next. This is a point, having interactive workshop formats, which should be straightforward, but we kept seeing that it's a difficult task, and many organizations who work with such platforms lack really knowledge of this. We too often saw that the goal of a workshop was sharing knowledge or discussing different points of a scenario, for example. And then in the first hand, like, partners created a workshop which was like presentation, 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 and 5 minutes of discussion if you're lucky. Really going there and saying, okay, we have like now a full day workshop without any presentation, but just a circle of chairs, and we start discussing things. is often in many contexts new, and it's really important to have the courage to try new formats and develop them, and some more capacity building in certain contexts might be necessary. So we figured this is an important point to mention. Next. Then cultural specificities. Here you see we organized a study tour, for example, from Tanzania with Tanzanian partners to Bangladesh to exchange. And that's of course an example of different cultural specificities, but that can be within a partnership as well, even if it's in the national context. Of course, there you can have different cultures present, but even among different sectors, there are different cultures. And CSOs might use different language from the private sector, even from the academic sector. So being aware of such differences is important, and to make sure that all kinds of stakeholders really have the chance to speak out in the way they are familiar with, and that they are understood, and that misunderstandings are avoided, because I think multi-actor platforms always involve different cultures, and be it even different cultures from sectors. Next. And then a last general point would be to keep a long-term view on the process. Because usually, I mean, when we talk about 100% renewables, of course, that's a long-term process. Hopefully quicker than we can expect right now, but still it will be a process, and a long-term one. And so those multi-actor partnerships that we are talking about are ones that work in such circumstances, and it just takes time. And even building it up among different actors who might not know each other, it takes time to build trust and to build experience of how to work together. It may be that you need to navigate around obstacles that you didn't foresee, be it a pandemic right now, of which Fentia will speak about, or be it other political changes in government. So you need to remain flexible. And also when you look for funding for that, your funders really need to understand that and give you the flexibility of working around such obstacles, because it's really a long process really to have the political results. It might go quickly, as we saw, to set up platforms and to develop policy papers, scenarios and all that, but until you really get the sort of transformative changes that we're looking for, just takes time, and that should be, and we should plan with that from the beginning, and the discussions with funders around that are really crucial. So with these, oh no, I have one more. Okay, the relevance aspect. Thank you, Anna. That was one of the greatest challenges, that such a platform that we set up in Tanzania or Bangladesh were not becoming like a new bubble in themselves, sort of locked away from the political processes. And one way of keeping it relevant was for us the link to SDGs, so to all other development criteria. And I mean, with the energy sector, and especially 100% RE vision, it's obvious that it touches all sorts of development goals. So we kind of worked on the links here. You see just a general overview how 100% RE is linked to every SDG, but also in political aspects, it's important to speak sort of with all sort of ministries in the countries and all sectors for which this might be relevant, and then really find out which aspects of your strategy, which aspects of the scenario and all the proposals you make are most relevant to them, and focus on that. So this relevance among all the SDGs, I think Agenda 2030 is a good framework for thinking about that, is quite an important point we found. And I think now I'm done, and look forward really to what Adrian tells about the specific example of Costa Rica, and then Fentia about navigating around the COVID crisis. And then I also really look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Joachim. And 2 points from my side. Your point on interactive presentation format and workshop formats is well taken. I think that's also very important for now online meetings, and we are still getting there, as you can see. So currently could probably be a lot more interactive. So hopefully we can improve that as well. Before we are going to the next presentation or the intervention of Adrian from Costa Rica, please join us at slido.com again. And while you are doing so, the next question though, yeah. So what are the opportunities in setting up multi-stakeholder platforms? Please feel free to post a word or 2 words, and then we'll see on the word cloud what comes up. And while you are doing that, I'll just have a quick look. Oh yeah, if there are any questions, but I don't think so yet. Do I see any hands? No, so since we are waiting, if you do have any questions for my colleagues Eduardo or Joachim, please type them in the chat box and we can quickly reply to them. Otherwise, we'll come back to them later on. And in the meantime, what is happening in the word cloud? So we can see that people already start to input. Innovation currently is at least mentioned twice or 3 times, so it's the biggest one. What else do we have, including opponents? I think that is very important as well, because in the end, if we can't convince our opponents as well to shift to a renewable-based system or to mitigate climate change, it will not only take longer, but it might be impossible to do. Also, plurality of solutions is a very good point. I think there are different pathways to get to the point where we need to go, but that might take quite a lot of time as well. So we have a question from Gunnar from Invoice. How are you developing the work further presently in Tanzania and Bangladesh? So I think that is a question for my colleague Joachim.
Yes, hello Gunnar, thank you for that question. It's a tough one also because of the Corona crisis. Actually, currently in Tanzania, the government is revising its NDC. And our partner there, Can Tanzania, has been asked to inform that NDC revision, and the drafts that we have seen are creating some hope, at least, because they refer to the scenario and the work we did there, even though it could be much more ambitious, we think, but it goes into the right direction. And so our partner, Can Tanzania, is taking that work further and is in constant exchange with the government on this, even though it is a problem that currently we have no real funding to take it forward as deeply as we would like to. In Bangladesh, actually the main partner organization CDP that was working on that and presented the scenario last year was working with us on a strategy on how to take it further after we presented the scenario. Unfortunately, much of the staff is also not able to work for a while now due to COVID. So we are not sure yet in terms of Bangladesh.
And one more question, maybe very, very shortly. How do you ensure that the government develops the trust to work with 100% RE scenarios that were developed abroad, especially in countries which have no similar modeling expertise to verify the outcome? I would actually like to give that question very quickly to both of my colleagues. So Eduardo, do you want to say something? You have a lot of experience with modeling and the policy science interface in Ecuador already. So maybe in 1 or 2 sentences, what is your experience with that?
In general, hi, thank you. In general, the experience with multi-actor partnerships in Ecuador, I would say that there are a few important things to take into consideration when building a multi-actor partnership. And the first thing is the identification of stakeholders. So which stakeholders will be participating in the first round of meetings? So this is for me something that could change the process dramatically, depending who you invite in the first place. So depending if you want a more open discussion and more deliberate argumentation between people that have very different views, or if you have a like-minded community creating a robust discourse to then create critical mass. So you have to have a clear objective of this multi-actor partnership, and depending on that, you will choose the stakeholders. And this is something that is very important. And secondly, what is important, I think, is within the process of knowledge co-production, how do you, the methodology, which is the methodology you are using in the knowledge production, and which are the groups you are conforming within this space of dialogue. So depending of the time or what is the result you want, you may have groups of categorized in sectors. So you make the people from academia in one table, the people from government in another table, civil society in another table, and NGO in another table. And then this will be a typical process for creating awareness of the different perspectives. But if you like to have a richer discussion and more innovative solutions, I would say that you might mix them all to have more discussion and more deliberation. So those are things that I can share with you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. One sentence, Joachim, from your side, but really only one sentence.
That's going to be a long one then. To maybe briefly to Thomas, I mean, Richard's question, I think is maybe one for the groups later. And to Thomas, that's of course the tricky part, to ensure that governments develops trust to work with the scenarios. Because, as you say, many times there is not the academic expertise in many countries to create models themselves. Like the first point was to make sure the governments are at the table, sort of co-creating the scenarios, in the sense that they also define sort of the objectives, the priorities, also share the data. Which all of this ensures that it will be more difficult for the government to attack sort of the scenario due to wrong assumptions or wrong data and all that. And it also helps them to understand what such a scenario can do and what it cannot do. And then once it's presented, it's important to keep presenting it to them and discuss specific aspects that they are interested in. And of course, we would wish that in international cooperation, also academic cooperation could be launched, so that local universities would getting the expertise to do that themselves. So far, only few universities around the world are able to do such nationwide models.
Thanks a lot for that as well. So in the meantime, you can see the word cloud. Mutual learning, innovation, and ownership are the most or the biggest opportunities in setting up multi-stakeholder platforms. And with that, I would like to go to the next presentation, the intervention of Adrian Martinez Blanco from La Ruta del Clima on the benefits of multi-actor partnerships for inclusive decision-making in Costa Rica. I think my colleague needs to stop sharing her screen first. So, I hope you can see that. Adrian?
Oh, thank you. So I'll be going through the slides pretty quickly, if you can, Anna. But thank you all of you for giving me the space to talk about the work we do. La Ruta del Clima is an NGO that focuses on public participation in climate decision making. So multi-stakeholder partnerships are very important for us because it allows different stakeholders from society to be involved in the decision making around climate change. Next slide, please. And in the project that we began with the Bread for the World and World Future Council and the Institute for Sustainable Futures. It was very important for us because it enabled us to start talking and being involved in an issue that usually we're not as NGOs able to be part of, because in Costa Rica, energy it's an issue that is dealt by the state. It's a state-run system, so governance decision, planning, and budgeting and technology decisions are not something that is consulted usually, and those decisions do not really involve NGOs. And to be able to be part of this partnership began to open in this issue for us, and began to give us tools, and give civil society in general a different perspective on how could this move forward. And even though we have in Costa Rica very ambitious um, climate policies, this the technical or the possibilities behind it that could be increased are not something that is understood, and the availability of data and the understanding of data are issues that are very important and that are not necessarily very open. And as I'll mention a little bit more later on. And next slide, please. And so developing the project 100% renewable energy in Costa Rica, I think it's missing something, but anyways, I have the slide out here also, so I read it. Gave us like an opportunity to start developing our own data and asking for data, because I think as civil society we never had really the chance for us to question where is the data and how can it be interpreted, and do we have access to it, and what do we think about that. And that is something that this project, through modeling and the development of uh, policy roadmap, gave us the chance to question that, and to actually think that we can be able to be part, we can be able to join these discussions with an informed and effective participation. And so the first thing that we developed in this project is a multi-stakeholder workshop, where we gather NGOs, and we gather business representative, government officials, and energy cooperatives that we have in Costa Rica, and also the representatives from the main public-owned company that sort of has a monopoly on electricity generation. And there we have a discussion on how could we move forward, and this informed the development of the model that we developed in this project. Later on, we had the results, and we had a workshop where we focused on the technical issues. And in this process, we had the participation of the current Minister of Environment, that used to be the director of the climate change direction. You could go to the next slide. And so this was a very insightful thing, because most of these people are either directly or indirectly engaged with energy, but were not necessarily involved in that development of the model that sort of backups the decarbonization plan. And that is something that we were not part of either, because Costa Rica does have its own modeling state developed model in terms of the decarbonization plan. But this model that we were able to develop sort of gave a different approach to it, and also let us understand which data was publicly available and which data we were not able to access. And that is something that is very important, because in Costa Rica, there's much data that is not disaggregated, so you cannot understand what are the different implications that decisions have. And some of the data is either privately owned, or it's state owned, but you're not able to access it. So going through this process as an NGO that is focused on participation was very valuable, because it joins other efforts that we had, for example, in terms of adaptation, where there's also lack of data, or the available data, you have to pay for it, or it's not analyzed. And then that is also one of the big things that this project helped us do. It analyzed data that was available, or help us get it. And if there is data that is not analyzed, the public and the different stakeholders cannot take a position on it, or cannot develop policies of their own. So it is very important to have this sort of projects, because it gave us access to what can be done, and let us understand it, so we can have a political position on it. Next slide. Thank you. Well, I think you can skip this one because it's just the same about the dialogue. So this project produced three main products. One was a model of the energy matrix of Costa Rica in different scenarios, and how could it become more ambitious? How could this ambition save us resources, and how it could go beyond what we have imagined. And we also we're able to understand that some of the decisions that we have in our decarbonization plan are not necessarily based on what is technically, financially, or possible, but political decisions that are behind it, which are okay. But if you don't understand the technical structures between, you won't notice them. And this sort of opens our mind into what can be possible, not only in terms that we can be more ambitious about our decarbonization, but that we can maybe do it even differently, and there is political implications of this. So we also developed a policy roadmap and a summary for policymakers that we have been using, advocating or beginning to advocate in this issue in Costa Rica. And as an NGO, this is a new topic for us, but it has given us a platform, and hopefully gives other NGOs and other stakeholders a platform to use these resources to create their own position and get the dialogue going, which is the main objective as La Ruta del Clima. Next slide, please. And finally, I mean, for us, as I just mentioned, the value of this partnership was not only to create data and analyze it as a third party, but also to then be able to claim a seat on the table, a seat that we never had before, because this was not an issue that as civil society we were part of. I mean, there's a lot of NGOs that maybe are engaged in electric cars or other sort of secondary topics related with the energy transition, but in itself, the transformation of how we generate that energy, how we use it, that is something we were not part of because we did not have access up to the data and we did not understand it. And so being able to understand, for example, that Costa Rica could develop more wind power and sources, or more solar power plants, and that is totally feasible. And instead, we're probably going different options. For example, pushing cane production for biofuels as a transition in fuel. Well, that's okay, but we could be more ambitious, and that is possible. And we were not aware of the details of that. And that is something that we really value of this partnership, that we will never be able to have this, and that NGOs and even institutions, privately or public, did not have the capability to have their own analysis of these very complex issues that we were able to do through working in partnership with our colleagues here. So we're very thankful for it, and I think this is probably the relevance for us to be able to have the tools to be able to join the discussion in an informed and effective way. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. And also from my side, it was really a delight working with you. Costa Rica is an amazing country which regularly gets into the headlines of news because it runs on almost 100% renewable electricity around the year. But the study really showed that it could be more ambitious. And I think that is very interesting to see, because right now there are a lot of discussions about green recovery or recovery in general post-COVID, hopefully soonish. And you started working with the parliament to actually talk about that. And there's a real need to get this kind of information of what is possible and to build this capacity among even policymakers. So we really see that the project really feeds well into that, and I really hope that we will get some more results soon. And also, I really like that your slogan, participation is a right. I also think so, I completely agree. But as I said before, we are in a time of pandemic, everybody is at home. I'm not sure about you, but my back begins to hurt because I'm only sitting at the table the whole time, not even going to the office very much. So participation is a human right, definitely, but how can we ensure that participation is still being done in times where everybody's working from home and these physical meetings are not possible at all, or to a very, very limited extent? And let's With that, I would like to go to my colleague Fentje Jacobsen from WWF Germany, who just is coordinating or actually leading a project on 100% renewable energy and multi-actor partnerships. And unluckily, the project started with the lockdown in most countries March this year. So hopefully she can tell us a bit more about setting up multi-actor partnerships in times of COVID. Fentje?
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for the invitation, also for the introduction. Yeah, after we heard something about the conceptual approach, now some practical experience in the past, I would like to tell you something about our experience, like very recent experience in setting up a map project. And I just would like to very briefly just introduce the project to you just in 2 sentences, and then I will quickly go over to the challenges we faced. The project is around setting up multi-actor partnerships. Could you go to the 3rd slide, please? Thank you. It's about setting up 100 multi-actor partnerships on 100% renewable energies in 3 different countries, in Nepal, Uganda, and Vietnam. And this is to facilitate ambitious climate action and sustainable development strategies. So I just would like to introduce the different partners working in this project to you on the coordination level. Next slide, please. As Anna already mentioned, it's WWF Germany and also the World Future Council together with Brot for the Welt. And in the different countries on the local level, it's always a WWF office together with ECHO in Uganda, the PRC Center in Nepal, and Green ID in Vietnam. And while Joachim already showed you or explained the ideal project flow of how we were planning to set up this multi-actor partnerships, this is just if I just remind you the flow he showed to you, it's the same, just in a different visualization. So we started in March, and as Anna already mentioned, this was parallel with the lockdown, not only in Germany, but also in all 3 project countries. So we are a bit stuck in phase 1. I would like to say. So we're still working on setting up the multi-actor partnership to define a joint vision. So I would like to go right to the middle of the challenges we faced. This would be on the next slide. So I would say first we faced more internal challenges. So we started in March, and all processes were slowed down and delayed, beginning with very easy administrative processes, from contractual agreements to hiring staff. This is it sounds so easy, but it's very hard if we're not allowed to meet someone face to face. And also a very important thing, and I think you all have experience in setting up projects and setting up a team, it's the team building is missing. And this is really, really hard to work together. And then we also faced some major external challenges. First, the agenda setting in the different project countries. I think not only we were more or less working, finding our own way on this new kind of way of working. Also, the different stakeholders, they are facing the same difficulties. So it was really hard or it is still really hard to set the agenda, to find our way in on and set that agenda on 100% renewable energies. And also, I think the most important challenge and the most crucial rather is that no meetings were allowed to take place. And this is, I think Joachim mentioned this already, and how important it is that discussions are able to take place, and like interactive meetings where like inclusive participation is possible. So this is like the core, like the heart of multi-actor partnerships, and this was not possible. So I would come to the next slide, Anna, please. So, okay, first of all, we were all a bit in the transition phase and maybe all a bit frozen and waiting what's coming up next. And we all had to learn a lot. We all had to learn, okay, what is still possible? How long will it be like this? And what can we expect from the next month or years or, yeah, hopefully not. And then we kind of started to work and build a solid project foundation. We tried to do what is possible, to do the desk work, to do the stakeholder mapping, which Joachim mentioned is one of the most important parts to set up a map. We are working on the communication strategy, not only like in the different national ones, but also an international communication strategy. And then also we're starting outreach where possible. And then the next slide, please. I think what we all learned, like in this new era of COVID, if I may say so, is like the first idea was, oh yeah, why we're not doing it remotely? It's like this wouldn't be that easy to just meet people remotely, because this is kind of right now what everyone is doing, isn't it? But we were really struggling with this, because we thought, how can trust be established among the different stakeholders who are coming from different groups, like different perspectives, different opinions. This is like building trust, and it's like a very important piece. And also the lack of infrastructure among some stakeholders is also a challenge. Like not all stakeholders have access to like internet. This is and then also we were thinking, like, doing it remotely, wouldn't it just favor the strong and already present actors? And this was for us, like, this would be contradictory to a map approach for us, because for us it's important that it's about also inclusive participation, like to build joint vision. So I think Joachim raised some high expectations that I would deliver a solution here, but unfortunately I can't, because we had to learn a lot. We're still learning, and we also see that in all the three countries we have found a bit of different approaches. We had to adapt to different circumstances, and for example, in Vietnam right now, the numbers are really low, like the numbers of COVID cases, and it's possible again to meet. So here we can slowly start to establish a map, whereas in Nepal, for example, the situation is rather worsening. So I don't have a solution at this point, unfortunately, but I hope, yeah, in the discussion a bit later, maybe you have different experiences. I think one of the challenges we're facing is that we started to establish the map with like parallel with COVID. I think the case might be a bit different, where maps are already established, where like the foundation was already built. But yeah, here I'm curious to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Fentia. And indeed, we do not have a solution yet, but I really hope that we can get some discussions going in the breakout sessions now. But before we go there, one more Slido. So if you could go to Slido. Thank you. So we had the opportunities of multi-actor partnerships, and now we have the challenges. So share your experience. What are the challenges in setting up multi-stakeholder platforms? And while doing so, just some general issues right now. So my colleague will basically put you in the breakout rooms of the session you registered for. please unmute yourself and ideally also turn on your camera so we can see each other and really have a discussion about the 3 topics: policy science interface, opportunities and challenges of maps, and maps in times of COVID. And this will take about 10 minutes, and afterwards we will get back to this panel session, I guess, or plenary room, and my colleagues will give a very, very short summary of what has been said in their respective breakout groups. And after that, we are actually at the end. So I give you 1 more minute to go to Slido. I can also do that, hopefully. Let's see. Where do I have it? Here I have it. So I can see that at least one person already had the same one I have. COVID is definitely a challenge, and continuity is also a challenge. That's very true indeed. And I think it is really crucial to keep multi-actor partnerships going and to find engaging formats and make the process really relevant to kind of establish this continuity, which you need to have long-lasting changes in policies, right? And with that, I would actually like to open the breakout sessions. Thanks, everybody. I know it's quite late for some of you, and here in Germany, it's dinner time. So I'll just ask my colleagues, Joachim, Fentje, did we actually have a policy room? A policy science interface room?
No, we didn't.
Okay. Then I'll just ask Joachim and Fentje to 1 sentence, what is your key takeaway from the discussion?
Okay. We talked a lot that even though we agree with the challenges that Fentje mentioned, that we can see some opportunities in times of COVID as well. One that was mentioned is that in times of a crisis, thinking out of the box is necessary anyway, and that's exactly what multi-actor partnerships are supposed to do, think outside the box and find solutions. And the promotion of renewable energy might even be easier now because the pandemic showed it's more resilient, it's cheaper, so many, and also needed for health posts off grid, and also when people are more at home, energy access at home, also more and more an important issue. So there are some reasons why there are new opportunities. But then again, the last point made by Thomas then was trust, the point of trust that I made also, which cannot be built online. So whenever we start these kind of projects, we need to factor in that the process will take longer than we expected.
Thanks a lot. Fentje?
Seems like you had a similar discussion with, yeah, we were a rather small group, but in the end we had the same opinion that also building partnerships and relationships in times of a lockdown is not possible, and that in that case we should rather focus on already existing relationships and partnerships and strengthening them, but also use the time to build capacity with regard to online trainings and workshops, because this can be useful as well for the future. 1 sentence.
Perfect, thanks. And we are actually in time. So just a couple of sentences from me. So quickly sharing my screen. Thanks for having made the time to join us today. And as I said before, this is a webinar series. We have 1 more to go. And the webinar on political success, ensuring relevance of 100% RE strategies in the global south pretty much takes up where the presentation of Joachim ended, making 100% RE strategies and the peer-to-peer dialogues relevant, and how to ensure their continuity, which was one of the main challenges identified prior as well. So we will be welcoming colleagues from ICLEI, Jurist, transportation organization, and also SECAM, agroecology food producer in Egypt. And the next webinar will take place on the 17th of November at 9 a.m. UTC/10 a.m. CET time. You can still register, and we will be following up soon with the slides and also a link to the publication, and of course this recording. And with that, I would like to thank you and have a nice day or evening wherever you currently are in the world, and keep healthy and stay safe.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank you
a
very
lot.
much. Yeah. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.